The situation on the ground in Kiev at the moment is very volatile and violent. The anti-government protesters have held firm on Kiev's main square, clashing with riot police who last night tried clearing them from downtown Kiev. They're burning tires to keep the riot police at a distance and hurling cobblestones that they're digging up from the streets, throwing them at the riot police as the riot police retaliate with tear gas, stun guns. It's a pretty violent scene. There have been more than 25 deaths reported and hundreds of injuries. It's really hard to say whether this will escalate into a civil war. What I can say for certain is that a country, a city, Kiev, which were very peaceful, one of the most peaceful cities that I've ever been to, and I've been living here since 1999, has just changed completely. People, the protesters, people that have joined the protest movement have changed. They're completely, many of them have become militant. They're protesting and challenging the authority of Yanukovych because they see that he robbed their future. They feel that he robbed their European future by backing away from EU integration agreements late in November and moving closer towards Russia. Whether it will escalate into a civil war, essentially what we have here is an uprising by half of the country, all the way from Kiev to the west, against Yanukovych, where the eastern parts of the country, the less politically active, are taking more of a kind of watching this from the sidelines. So in terms of a civil war where eastern Ukrainians would fight western Ukrainians, I'm not sure that's a very likely scenario, but potentially we could have a kind of split in the country in terms of governance. What we have already happening today is protesters in western Ukraine have taken over government buildings and have forced the regional governors to resign. The Russians, according to people familiar with the situation, would be interested in either splitting the country in half and taking half of the country, or in the very least, locking it up in a civil war scenario to keep it within its backyard, its sphere of influence.
I'm deeply worried by the escalation of violence in Kiev and the numbers of...
With this most recent wave of violence that the country has not seen since independence, the European Union, officials, politicians in the European Union are today calling for targeted sanctions, travel bans and asset freezes on Ukrainian officials implicated in the violence and oligarchs who have been backing Mr. Yanukovych and his government. It could be a very influential instrument because many of Ukraine's richest officials and richest oligarchs actually, although they make their money here in Ukraine, their families live in Europe, in London, in Switzerland. They keep their money in banks in Europe. And so the threat of having their money frozen and having their families kicked out of the luxurious life they live in Europe could be a lever of influence that could force them to influence Yanukovych and force some kind of compromise here. It's really difficult to understand what Yanukovych's game plan is. He's obviously trying to hold on to power, but escalation in the violence and clashes between the police is only escalating the situation, increasing tensions, and there's no sign of the protesters backing away. And so, a compromise would seem to be in his interest to defuse the situation and then, serve out the rest of his presidency, which ends in 2015, March of 2015. But this escalation could increase the risk of him either ending his presidency sooner or being toppled, as many protesters would like. Roman Olearchyk, Financial Times, Kiev.